According to research, 70% of creative businesses report difficulty in scaling the operations while maintaining artistic integrity. The struggle is often compounded by the fact that 60% of these businesses fear embracing standard business practices which may dilute their creative vision. Moreover, 75% of creative entrepreneurs cite revenue unpredictability as a significant barrier to sustainable growth. To me, this highlights the tension between the desire for innovation and the necessity for operational efficiency. Now, our guest has navigated many of these challenges, leveraging creativity to stand out in a crowded marketplace and build a thriving business model that defies conventional norms. So, we'll explore how she's driving revenue growth in a bit. But first, hello, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest is Lindsay Scherr Burgess. Lindsay, you are the founder and moss boss of Green Wallscapes, which brings spaces to life with no hassle, preserved moss, walls, logos, lettering, and art. You've done projects in over 35 states, Canada, and the Caribbean. Employs a team of mostly female artists in your West Palm Beach studio. Your company's work, has really been called a lavish expression of botanical joy and being featured in magazines like Architectural Digest, Veranda Magazine, Palm Beach Daily News, and more. You've won a glowing list of accolades, worked with major developers like Amway Residential, Greystone, and many others, and major brands like Amazon, Starbucks, Garden of Life, Hilton, and again more. So you've got quite a glowing list of recommendations and awards, and certainly quite a career, because your background, as I understand it, was mainly in sales and marketing roles, but in diverse industries from organic produce, construction, commercial real estate, and book publishing. I'm curious, as I'm sure many of the listeners would be too, why preserve moss and why start a company like Green Wallscapes?
So I started Green Wallscapes by accident. I think most people start a company like very intentionally with a big business plan and thinking, oh, this is what I want to do with my life, and dedicating all their time and energy and all that kind of stuff. And for me, I went on Pinterest, I saw a moss ball, and at the time when I was starting my company, there were very few companies in the world that were doing this. And the company that I liked, the piece was in Europe, and I wasn't going to buy a piece from Europe and bring it over here. It was just too cost prohibitive. So my husband and I, we make things. So I literally went to a craft store on a Saturday night, because that's how exciting I am, and bought some moss, glued it on a frame. Most of the moss fell off, but at least I got the experience of doing it. And it was a transformative moment in my life. And then I showed some friends and they were like, ooh, that's so cool. I've never seen anything like that before. And so slowly but surely, my husband and I let people know, hey, we're doing this kind of as a side hustle. And we did it for a side hustle for a year and a half, basically just doing moss walls for fun. And then my husband was on the board of a local charity and they wanted to do one. And then I had a friend who was a developer and he wanted to do one. And so it was very organic and slow in the very beginning. There wasn't a lot of attention on it. It was very much like a side hustle. I think we did 3 or 4 projects in the first year. And then we had a little Etsy store we started, and it was very soft. It was very organic, which is interesting because I work with organic materials. And in 2018, I had a project that I was working on that ended. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And at that time, I was looking at jobs. I just didn't really want to start doing business development again for another company selling the idea of starting fresh and getting back into construction or real estate, it just seemed really daunting to me. And so my husband was like, see if you can start your own company, which is way harder than having a job, but that's okay. And you make a lot less money for a long time before you start making money. So it was like, okay, let me try this. And very slowly it was like, okay, if I can make $1,000 a week, I can keep the lights on. And then it was like, okay, if I can make $2,000 a week, then I can get somebody to help me. And it was very slow and organic like that for a while. And then, but once I started going, we got inquiries pretty quickly we did a project for Southwest Airlines. There was a woman who was doing an event for Southwest and asked us to do the moss lettering, I think within 2 or 3 weeks of me deciding that this was going to be a business. Since then, since 2018, so it's 6 years, we've done over 1,000 moss walls. Wow. And like you said, we've done a lot of major companies. And I think the background that I have in sales and marketing has been really helpful in understanding what clients' issues are
Mhm.
and then mitigating for those. So when you're dealing with big companies, there's different language that you have to use. There's a different kind of responsibility that you have in terms of being able to deliver on time and on budget and all those kinds of things. So being able to like really work through that and then work collaboratively, sometimes with very large teams to get to a final result. So in some projects we'll be working with 10 different people to for design decisions and things like that. So it's very interesting, and it's we are making commercial grade art. So we are not we do some
Mhm.
art just for ourselves that we sell on our website and things like that, but for the most part we make large scale commercial applications of moss walls, and that is our business, and it has been a really amazing ride. It's just amazing that we're able to sustain a team and grow and put processes in place and make things go as smoothly as possible. So it's very easy for people to buy these things and enjoy them and get them up. So it's been a wild experience. I think that was a long-winded answer to like why moss walls, but that's basically what it is. Yeah.
Brilliant. I can certainly understand the attraction from an aesthetic point of view. It's certainly very
Mhm.
different and lends a unique dimension of experience to a space. But is there more to it now that you're doing commercial projects? Is there another reason, or are there other reasons as to why a company would want moss as part of their spaces?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what's unique about these walls is that they look alive, but they are not alive. So they've gone through a process of preservation. So there's no watering or special lighting required. And literally, you're just supposed to put them up and not touch
Mhm.
them. In certain climates, you may need to mist it every once in a while, but you're not supposed to water it. You're not supposed to mist it. But like you want to, sorry, don't mist it, steam it
Mhm.
every once in a while if it gets really dry. But pretty much for the most part, it's like meant to be put up and enjoyed. Don't touch it. And so that's a great solution for companies that they want a biophilic look, or they want some wellness for their employees, but they don't want the ongoing maintenance and the cost of the
Mhm.
ongoing maintenance. The other thing about this too is that this material lends itself really well to flexible applications. So you can do certain arches and other things that you can't do with living plants. So it can be really more artistic and more manipulated. And so it's been a really cool experience. And it's this intersection between wellness, biophilic design, and there's also like a lot of austere spaces that are designed these days. And because there's so much austerity being put into spaces now, everything's so modern and clean, it becomes almost too sterile. And so these
Mm.
moss walls bring in that element of calm, of earth, of grounding. So if you are on the 30th floor of a big office building, this is a nice way to bring that grounding energy back in. And so it's still a natural material, so there's all sorts of weird nuances with it. Like the colors change sometimes, much of carpet. There's issues. It has an earthy smell that not everybody likes. Work through that. There's different things that, and sometimes people are like, well, I don't understand what this is and why is this not, I thought this was plastic and it's not plastic and those kinds of things. So it's confusing to people like what is it's kind of in this weird hybrid
Mhm.
space. And so it's been really interesting because we were lucky that like what we wanted to create and what people wanted, there was an intersection there. And so when you're creating commercial art, it's a very much a collaboration with your client. It's not like I'm the artist and
Mm.
this is only my vision. It's like I'm going to help drive what I think will look best. And from my experience of doing 1,000 of these, I know what works and what doesn't work. But at the same time, if a client says to me, hey, Linz, I want some crazy shape, or I want moss on the ceiling, or I want drips of moss coming off the side of the walls in rainbow colors, we'll do all these crazy things that a lot of other companies who do what we do won't, because they just don't work with the variety of materials, or they're just not as open to out of the box ideas for this.
Mhm.
Plus, when we're working with brands, they love that we can do custom colors, so we can actually color match pretty close to Pantones and things like that. So if you have a very specific brand guideline, we did a dentist office recently and we had to custom fabricate like 3 or 4 colors. It was pretty crazy that she wanted something so specific, but it was like those colors don't exist in the moss family and in the moss world, even the dyed ones. And so we had to make them. And so that was like a fun experience of learning how to do that. I don't know if it was fun for my team, but it was definitely fun for me to design and work on before they had to make it. Yeah. So it's been a really cool experience.
Excellent. Given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
So in my dream life, all I would do is talk on the phone with clients and just tell them about Moss Walls and do sales and marketing and get to talk to all these wonderful people that we get to work with. I would say 99.5% of our clients are the most wonderful, sweet, great humans on earth. And the fact that they trust us with their spaces and they want to bring our work into those spaces is just such a great, it's so heartwarming. And so that being said, I'd say like sales is probably where I should be. I get dragged a lot into operations, which honestly I hate. I've always hated operations. When there's problems or some guest drops our piece and they bang a corner or the installer installed something incorrectly and we have to troubleshoot those things. I've gotten very used to having to do that, but it's not where I'm happiest. I'm happiest on the front end selling things. I also like innovation. So I also like to think about what else can we do with this stuff and how can we apply it in a different way? Can we bring in other textures? We actually started working with this like textural element, like an acrylic textural element that blends beautifully with the moss and some other things just to try some different applications of the material that aren't just straight moss walls. So I think for me, it's like those are my areas of strength. I'm actually not that good at the moss, to be very honest with you. Like my team is significantly better than I am, but I understand the aesthetic of what I'm trying to arrive at. And I have a decent sense of space and aesthetics that helps drive the level that I want to work with. That being said, my team is amazing and has worked with me for a long time. So they understand what I want and how I want it and the level at which it needs to be delivered so that the product is also consistently beautiful. We have lots of techniques that we do that are proprietary to our team that take a long time for people to learn just to be able to deliver that kind of consistent look and feel, even if it's not the cheapest way of doing things. So we found that we really want to elevate as much as we possibly can. And we've tried to come up with innovations to make it faster for us to get that same look and feel and result.
So, in that area of strength, which is sales, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
With regards to sales,
Yep.
I would say that the easiest thing with sales is to do what you say you're going to do and respond quickly. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten on a phone call with a client and they have said to me, "You picked up the phone." I once had a woman go, "Oh, thank goodness you picked up the phone." And I was like, "Yes, how can I help you?" And that ended up being Marriott Worldwide. And we did their headquarters in Orlando. And it was because she literally could not get anybody else on the phone to help her get this project done. And she had a crazy timeline and we met the crazy timeline. The rest of the building wasn't done, but we got done on time. And so that was an example of just being available and then being really hyper responsive. Even if you have nothing to communicate with the client. Hey, you know what? I'm still waiting on my designer to finalize the design for you. I'll be back in touch in like a day or two once I have more information to keep them calm and those kinds of things. The responsiveness is your number one asset, in my opinion. And picking up the phone, following up, staying on top of it. And then once the clients have a good experience, making sure to just stay in touch with them and so that they don't forget you. And then if there are issues, then dealing with those issues quickly, because that's still part of the sales process, because stuff happens. And a lot of times things happen that are outside of our control. We had a piece, the wall was measured incorrectly, and we had to in Nashville, and we had to troubleshoot exactly how to do this in the install. Oh, and there was like a fire box in the middle of our wall. So we had to tell an installer who's never installed our work before and get on the call with him 2 or 3 times during the installation process to make sure that it got installed and the clients were super happy with the finished product. And so those are the kinds of things that are part of your service. And so that people say, you know what, they might not be the cheapest, but they are amazing to work with. And in our world, in the contracting world and in the subcontracting world, that sets you apart, especially when things are less busy. Because if you can say, hey, you may get somebody who's cheaper, but the quality's not going to be there. And if you have problems, you're going to need somebody to solve those problems.
Mhm.
And they may not have an issue, but I can tell you more than one time in my years of doing this, I have gotten calls with people going, oh my God, I have X, Y, or Z problems. What do I do? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't make your piece, so I can't help you. That's really ugly what
Yep.
that other person made. Like, you get what you pay for. So those are the kinds of things, like, I'm sorry, but you don't like it. You should have come with me to me in the first place, and I would have designed exactly what you would have liked.
Mhm.
So those are the kinds of things that, like, we've experienced over and over again. We're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive, but we really excel in customer service. And that is 100% still part of the sales process. And then staying in touch and staying on top of, we closed a deal this past week that literally we've been working on since, I think, February or March. It's August.
Mhm.
There's a lot of follow up that you have to keep doing. So it's also that coming up. And if you don't want to do that, I've now outsourced that piece. So my team helps me with the follow up part because I'm not that good at remembering to follow up with these 37 people that have emailed us. So I have a woman on my team who's literally, her entire job is just to stay on top of following up on the quotes and staying on top of things so that we can
Mhm.
close more work. And especially now that the economy is a little bit weird, those kinds of things are more crucial than ever.
I'm curious with follow up, especially after you finish a project, or at least stay in touch. What does that look like for?
If the client reaches out to us and they're like, it's amazing, we love it so much, we're super happy, we always ask for a Google review or those
Mhm.
kinds of things. And then we usually will do a couple of email newsletters and things like that throughout the year. And we also encourage them to keep following us on social media and stay in touch that way. And I'm sure there's some people that fall through the cracks, but we very much try to stay front of
Mhm.
mind. I have a whole system in place for social media that we do. So it's a lot of it's automated, and that took a long time to set all that stuff up, but
Mhm.
now it's like it goes. And then I'll be at a networking event, this woman who's never interacted with my social media, who's never liked anything, who's never, oh, I see your posts all the time, you're just like so on top of things, I'm so impressed with everything you have going on. Never liked anything, never commented anything, but when I see them in person, that's when it really makes a difference. And ironically, one of our best lead channels is actually LinkedIn, not because I'm getting like direct leads through LinkedIn, but because I'm friends with lots of designers from 20 years of networking who I know, who go on there every once in a while. And I always am posting photos of all of our work.
Mhm.
So we stay top of mind. And so that's been, a great lead generation opportunity. But it's 15 years of building that network
Mhm.
you know, to then have it start actually paying off and working.
Sure. I completely agree with that one. I'm also curious as to how you maintain the artistic integrity of your work while ensuring that your business is scalable and profitable.
It depends on, so I personally don't care if I'm making something really ugly, but 95% of our work is really beautiful. And 5% is stuff that I would never, ever do if it was my artistic vision. So we actually have a collaborative experience, like design process that we do with our clients to go from, hey, I've got this wall, I can do anything, to, hey, this is what I actually want to do with my time or with my space. And so we work with them, and it's okay, I want to do this whole wall, and it's okay, but I only have a budget for this much. So what can we do with this much budget and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit more based on, and because it's commercial, it's a little bit more
Mhm.
practical than I would say like a fine art application. And not to say that our work isn't fine art, because some of the stuff that's delivered is like stunningly, ridiculously gorgeous. It's just that it's not just my vision, it's my vision in collaboration with the client. And to me, that's honestly more fun.
Mhm.
It's more interesting. I love branding. I love marketing. I think that's also an art form in itself, to build these kinds of companies and build these kinds of brands that people just know from being in the world. And then if we can do an artistic application on top of that or around a brand, it's really fun for me. I really do get a lot of, so that's more the creative side of
Mhm.
it. And then even today, I was in the studio with my team moving some succulents around because I didn't like the way that the design actually, once it was like off the paper and onto the moss, like the way that the layout and the flow was. So working through those kinds of things, that's how I keep my creative juices going. That being said, we have a whole design process. So we have a process where we do dimensional proofs, then we do moss flow designs. So the client has to approve that. Then we go into production. And if the client is super particular, which sometimes, especially when we're doing residential, they're super particular, then we'll actually send them photos during, like at the end of production, just to make sure that everything's copacetic before we ship it. And I would say that process has really helped us make sure that clients are super happy every single time. Rarely do people say that wasn't what I expected. Most of the time they're like, whoa, this is way better than I thought it was going to be. And that's really what I want when they have this experience, because there is energy that my team and love that my team puts on these pieces so that it has a certain look and feel. And there's probably ways of making it a little bit more profitable. There's probably ways of speeding it up a little bit, but frankly, we're doing an artisanal thing, and not many people get the luxury of doing an artisanal thing these days. So it's really neat.
Brilliant. And you talked about the need to educate clients who might be unfamiliar with the idea of preserved moss art. Other than doing podcasts like this, what other strategies have you used to not just educate, but to expand your market, including things like social media?
Yes, we're social media crazy. So we do all the big social media. I also do YouTube videos and explain exactly what the moss is. We're heavy on Instagram. I personally love Instagram. I'm not as much a TikTok person. I know that there's a lot of value there as well. And then, like I said, for us personally, because we do a lot of B2B, LinkedIn is where all the professionals are. So you also have to go where professional people are. And there's that. And then obviously there's in-person networking as well. It's great to do everything on the computer. Between 2020 and 2022, it was like everybody was researching everything on the computer. What we're seeing now is a return to before the pandemic, where people are going and they're networking. And there's also a lot of new people that have entered our market and our field. And so I'm always meeting new people when I go to design events. It's really fun. So I go to events that are around real estate and design and even general business to business, but the general business to business isn't usually very helpful, because it's not, I want people who are architects or engineers or construction people or things like that, because those are the clients that are hiring us for this.
You talked about the fact that your team often does things better than you could. How has your thinking around delegation evolved as you've grown your team? And could you talk a little bit about how it's impacted your business to what it is today?
Yeah, it's been a very slow process, to be honest with you. I started with just me, then it was me and a contractor, then it was me and two contractors, then it was me and then I had to formalize it and make people employees, and then it was like, and all these things were an evolution over time. I think that people get really hung up on, I have to be all set up with everything right away. Like it was a messy thing. The developing of this process took literal years, and I may have lost some brain cells doing it too. It's just been like really intense. And we got to a point where it was like, we knew what the flow was. We started documenting everything, like first you do this, then you do this, and created standard operating procedures for all of these different things, so that we didn't forget to send the emergency moss kit, and we didn't forget to photograph the piece at the end, and we didn't forget to send the follow-up email, and we didn't forget to follow up 7 times to make sure that someone was paying us, and all these other things that are part of it. And I've had wonderful team members, some who are still working with me, some who are not, who really helped get all that documentation down. For example, I just hired a new assistant, and she is able to do a lot of the job very quickly because we have so much documented. So it's process over the people that are actually doing it. Now, obviously, you need somebody who is actually smart, who can learn from their mistake and not continuously make mistakes. That's the baseline. But beyond that, you also need to make sure that there are resources for them so that they can go into your library of how you do things to be able to be like, okay, this is how they did this before. So this is what I need to do in the future to be able to do it. And you also need people who are able to figure things out, whether it's YouTube University or it's they just have inherent knowledge. I'm very blessed to have an employee on my team who has 30 years of experience in production and fabrication. So he'll be like, oh, 20 years ago, we made it like this. So I think this would be a really good way of doing things. And I'm like, I do too. Great, because you already know how to do it. And then I have younger employees who don't have a lot of experience, but are very tech savvy and they can figure out how to do things. So you need all these different skill sets. The one thing I will say is if you do have a very technical job that requires a lot of technology, whether it's we have a whole back end and things like that, and you have somebody who really does not understand technology, do not put them in that role. I have hired assistants who are like amazing on the phone but they could not do computer stuff. And it just became like this whole rigmarole. So you want to make sure that like you're hiring so that you're setting people up for success as much as humanly possible. And it's the same thing with the people who do the moss, who make our moss walls now. That's not something that you necessarily like. There's no moss school. So we have a moss school. We have a training program that we do with people, but they have to have an inherent ability to work with their hands and make things with their hands and be okay working with their hands 40 hours a week, because it's very tedious, arduous work sometimes, especially when we're doing really large walls. And so it's like you have to be okay with not doing computer work. Some people just are more computer people, and some people are more, they want to work with their hands and do physical things like that. So it's learning all of that and then trying to hone in and trying to find those people and hoping that they're going to get along and all that other stuff. But we don't have to go there. That's a whole nother conversation.
I'm also curious, given these different dynamics, how did that kind of change, or how did you get it to work for you during COVID?
Oh, COVID. So every single thing that you read about, heard about, thought about, I went through it. Okay, so 2018, I started my company. It's so cute in my house, blah, blah, blah. 2019, I get a little studio space. We're like starting to rock and roll. I have 2 girls working with me, blah, blah, blah. And then now I'm at 4. And so we're getting some really good traction by that point. Like we're moving. And I'm like, all right, we're doing this. This is amazing. And then 2020 hits, and I had just spent $8,000 on a coaching program to help me like get systems in place and other things like that. And the world stopped. And every day I would have to stop and sit with my team and be like, okay, so the rules today are this. Like we can still come to work because there's 5 of us. Everyone has to stay 6 feet apart. And if you're feeling even a little bit sick, don't come. But they were like, Lindsay, please, we don't want to stay in our house. Like we're going to be miserable if we have to be at home. And they were all friends. So it was like they wanted to leave their house. So luckily in Florida, like we always skirted through that. At the same time, I had 6 weeks worth of work for them. And then there was nothing to do because the economy was so weird and everyone was like, what's it going to be? Da, 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 da. And when I tell you, like, every time a project went out and I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to have anything for these people to do. And how am I going to afford to keep them on? It's still very much in a startup mode. Like I don't have tons of extra cash to support these employees. So luckily, because of the PPP loan, we were able to keep everybody employed. There were days where we were just cleaning and for lack of a better, not hanging out, but we were like cleaning, making fun projects for ourselves, like inventing work for ourselves while we were waiting for projects to come in. And then because everyone got so much money from the different relief things, then and a lot of people were renovating during that time because there weren't people in office buildings and things like that. It like exploded. And so then I had problems with supply chain. I had great resignation issues. Like you can't imagine. There was one point, I think it had 100% turnover. Wow. It was horrible. It was like every day I was coming and there was like, oh, this one quit today because they got $1 more down the street. And then Bitcoin, I had one girl leave because she went and did Bitcoin. She only lasted at that job for a little bit. And so it was like those kinds of things. It was just like thing after thing. And then some of my employees got COVID and then it was like working through that whole protocol. That stunk. And it's just, and then in trying to encourage my employees to get vaccinated also. So I actually during when the vaccinations came out, I actually built in time additional time for them to get the vaccine. And if they weren't feeling well the next day, they could stay home and rest, because it's like a 24-hour thing where you don't feel well. So it was like, but I wanted to encourage them to be able to go do that if they wanted to do that. And that was also part of it. So it was just, there was all of these things that I had to put in place. And in 2021, we crushed it, but it was also really hard because there was just so much demand, and then we couldn't get material. And then the employees were like quitting, and it was really one of the worst and best times of my life, in the sense that, oh my God, I have this business and it's working really well on one hand, like revenue wise, but on the operation side, it was a mess. And there was a lot of infighting in the team. And then I was getting involved in the infighting, and I hated the whole thing. So in 2022, my studio manager came in, and I was like, I just need help. Like, I can't manage these people anymore. I don't know how to do this. I'm a salesperson. I need to be in my area of genius. Please get me out of this. And so he has been just a godsend in that respect, and also really helped with installation. Like, I was doing all the installation work. I am not a good Moss installer. And so finding people that like can take things off your plate. I remember our first installation, I was like, oh my goodness, this person is going to change my life. I just know it. And so that is part of that. He had many years of experience, and it's been a great working relationship ever since. And then there's ebbs and flows with the business. And so right now, for example, we're in like this weird lull because of the election. I think a lot of people are like, who's it going to be? And it's, you know what, really your day-to-day life is not going to be impacted that much, whether we have a Democratic president or we have a Republican president. As much as people are dramatic about it, let's be real, that's not necessarily true. Now, that being said, I'm not getting into politics, but it's like, it could go dark one way or the other. And but it's like, it messes with everybody's mind because they just don't know what that thing is going to be. And I don't think that it's going to be, I think it's just, we're all just survive until 25. That's the mantra that most of the contractors and people that I'm talking to right now, they're like, survive to 25, just get through this thing of people being stuff that used to close like that is taking months. Like I was telling you about that project that February, March, whatever, April, we've been working on it, and now they're ready to go. That was not the case before. It was much quicker. So we're just working through supply and demand and all those kinds of things. And there's a lot more companies that are doing what we do now than there was before. So I do have additional competition in my space. That being said, no one is the Moss boss. I am the only, that's actually not true. There's another guy in New York who's also a Moss boss, but nobody else is going to give this level of customer service and is going to deliver like such beautiful walls as we are. So that's what we have to stay focused on.
Given your experiences, would you say that you have perhaps been a little more intentional with the culture of the organization? And if so, how has it kind of instability and churn to what it is today?
I think that is the endless question of what kind of organization do you want to create? And I am like a total softie. I give people the benefit of the doubt, even if it hurts me. And it has hurt me many times. Luckily, my manager is not as gentle as I am in that respect. He's, you know what? They are not behaving properly. Like, we have to, like, this person cannot stay. They're actually starting to influence negatively some of the other people on the team. And he has a different kind of background, and he worked in corporate for a really long time, so he understands those kinds of things. I'm like super kumbaya. I just want everyone to get along and be best friends and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't necessarily work in business, to be very honest with you, because what I've found over and over again is that typically I just let like things I let bad behavior slide, and then people think that that's like an acceptable way of being. And then it makes the other team members pissed off, honestly. And so if you want A players and you want people who are really good at what they do, you have to get rid of people that aren't as on your team. And what I have found over and over again, and this is a lesson that I continuously learn, is that if you are running a ship and everybody's got to be on the ship with you, if you have one person that's, I want to row the boat this way and everybody else is going this way, you need to get this person off the ship because they will derail everything. And the other problem too is that there's collateral damage that happens over time with those people as well. So they can influence, even when they're gone, they can influence the current team because that person liked that other person and they got mad that person got fired, and they don't understand the overall business experience that you're trying to, and the overall culture that you're trying to create. And sometimes you have to fire people that are fun. That sucks. You're like, I love you, but you're not really good for the business. There's things that are better for the business than, and I have to make hard decisions, even though I like want to be best friends with you. And that's a really hard one because you just love them, but you're like, but the results aren't there. I had an employee once who we spent weeks training as my assistant, and she just wasn't getting it. She just wasn't understanding. And like, we would go over the processes and the sit over, and she just couldn't understand. Okay, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And so she just couldn't get the steps. And I was like, I don't know. I can't explain it to you for 50 more times. Like, you just need to know what the steps are. Like, a client closes, you send an invoice. That's pretty straightforward. Just could not get it. And I was like, listen, I love you. Can we please stay friends? But this is just 100% not working. And so that's a really hard thing. I am terrible at it. But at the same time, if you want your business to be successful, sometimes you have to hire people that maybe aren't as dynamic or maybe, but they're great executors. And as someone who has a little bit of entrepreneurial ADD, and I always like shiny new projects and fun, and I need somebody who is stable and improving and getting it and those kinds of things, and that isn't going to ask me a million questions. Like, after they've figured it out, they're going to get it, and then I don't need to remind them over and over again. Because if I'm doing their job after 2 or 3 months, then it means that they're not doing their job properly.
I'd like to circle back to something you said earlier about communication and keeping your clients informed and things of that nature. And I would imagine that with each project that you undertake, there is a unique aspect to the project, which I'm sure would throw out timelines as such, and your ability to deliver within specified timeframes. How do you approach that and being able to communicate to clients and keep them informed of the entire process and when these projects could be delivered?
So I think the biggest thing is with projects that are hyper custom, we're having something weird cut out, or we're bringing in a frame, or we're having to order like some special color or something like that, or we're having to fabricate a color. Clients, luckily, most of our clients understand that when you're making custom work, it takes time. It's not like you order it on a Monday and it arrives on a Friday. You order it on a Monday and it arrives 6 weeks later, that kind of thing. And most of the time, our clients know that like they need to have a long lead time. I cannot tell you how many hundreds of projects I have said no to because I can't deliver. And that's the one thing that I will say is that my integrity in terms of, I told you I was going to get this done. If I have to work on at night, if I have to work on the weekends, it has to be done by the day I say it's going to be done. And I don't care what it does to me because it needs to be delivered the way that I said that I would deliver it. That being said, if the client doesn't respond, and we followed up 4 times saying, hey, do you like this design? Hey, do you like this design? Hey, do you like this design? They don't respond. And then they come back to us and they say, I like it. Can you deliver it in a week? It's no, because you have not responded. So there is, when I try to set up the expectations very early, I actually have a conversation about what the cadence of the project's going to look like. If there's a logo, this is what I need. This is how responsive I need you to be. I can deliver on this super tight timeline, but I need you to respond. And if you're not responding, then I can't deliver. But I can't have you call me then 2 or 3 weeks from now and be like, oh, I need this in the next 2 to 3 weeks because somebody else has already gotten in the pipeline. They've already paid, they've already responded. And so we're doing a kind of first come, first serve basis. And people are grown-ups, most of them are. And so they understand that there is a time frame. And when you're making things in the physical world and they're all custom fabricated for custom spaces, then it's not an off-the-shelf product. And because it's not an off-the-shelf product, like there's limitations to it. So that's part of it. And it's been a learning process of how to communicate with people and how to get designs in front of them so that they understand visually what they're going to get and all that kind of stuff. And then, like I said, most of the time we do we quadruple check on things just to make sure that like we're doing things correctly, or we have the right measurements, or we have the right information, so that we're fabricating correctly. Stuff happens all the time. Like this week alone, 2 clients have reached out to us saying, one client we installed on Tuesday, and the contractor built the space, the niche for our moss wall, 3 feet too big. So now they're going to have to suck up the cost of them building the space incorrectly. So that's one. And then option 2 is we actually have and then we have another guy who's, I love my moss wall so much, I actually want more moss wall. It's not big enough. It needs to be a bigger wall. So I love those kinds of situations where we've got a client that's super happy and wants to build more. And so where was I going with that? I'm not really sure. I think there's the ADD. You saw it. It went somewhere and then I came back.
Yeah, you're right. I heard you talk about working, especially with designers and real estate, at least professionals, but certainly going to conferences and things of that nature. And I'm curious if you have built partnerships with some of these folk that continue to pay dividends even today. If so, could you speak to that?
Today I had lunch with a girlfriend who I've known for 10 years, who's in Miami. We did business development together in a different firm. And she was up here and she's like, hey, Linz, I'd love to see you. And I was like, great, let's go have lunch. And they always say your network is your net worth, right? So I have been building relationships, some really close, tight-knit friends that it doesn't matter if we haven't seen each other for 5 years. It's just amazing to get together, and it's as if no time's passed. And then there's other people that I've met and I know them from the periphery and I've stayed in touch with them through LinkedIn, or I've encouraged them to follow us on Instagram, or some other way of continuing those touch points. But I have met them once or twice. And most of my 20s and a lot of my 30s was also dedicated to networking. And so pre-pandemic, I was at 2 to 3 networking events a week. And now what's happened is now I'm in my 40s and all of those people are the ones who are building things now, who have controls of the budget. So 10 years ago, they weren't in charge of anything. Yeah, they could introduce me to their boss or whatever, but it wasn't the same as it is now. They're the boss. And so they're the ones who are making these design decisions, or they're the ones who, are asking their friends who are in my network, hey, do you have a moss wall? Do you know anybody who does this? Because it's specified in these plans, or we want somebody local. We don't want to bring in somebody from far away, or that this company made like this amazing moss wall and they Google the name of the project and moss wall. And then we've done a blog about it so that they know that we're the ones who did it and those kinds of things. So really working on building the portfolio and building the presence, but also just making sure that if I meet somebody at a networking event, immediately they're in my LinkedIn. And even if they're not on LinkedIn all the time, it doesn't really matter because I can at least find them again if I really need to. But that's a long time of building. It's like people are like, oh my God, you just rolled out of bed and made this amazing moss business. No, that's not how it worked. It was like 20 years of networking, hustling, selling other people's stuff, and always in the back of my mind, like really desperately wanting to do something for myself. I was an entrepreneur a couple of other times, and frankly, it didn't work, not even close. And it didn't make any money, or I lost money, or I was doing commercial real estate during the global financial crisis. Like, what a freaking nightmare. And there were just all of these things. So I always say to people, it looks one way and it is another way. It's like Instagram versus reality. It's the same thing with the moss walls. Like, oh my God, that must be so much fun all the time. I'm like, oh, doing payment applications and working on certificates of insurance, which is a lot of what me and my assistant have to do all the time, and making sure that like we can actually get access to buildings and things like that. That's the majority of what we're doing on the front end of the business. It's not the glamorous, sexy stuff like getting to put the moss on the boards. And even when you're doing these large scale applications of these things, there's a slogging element to it almost, because you've got to get a fit, like just a crazy amount of moss on a crazy amount of boards. We recently did a wall that was 360 square feet, I think. And we have another one that's coming up that's 560 square feet. That's like 24 by 8 board. It's just enormous. And it's like, where do we put them? And how do we move them around? And how do we have enough material? And then making sure that the material actually arrives, because we import it from Europe. And then today we were trying to figure out how to get an arrival notice for the moss. There's all of these things where you're just like, It's just not what you think
Mm.
it would be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the Instagram is gorgeous pictures of pretty of stuff. And the reality is a lot of logistics, a lot of transportation, and many years of hustling to get to the point where people are just calling us and making it just
Mm.
rolling, if you will.
Okay, very insightful. Is there perhaps an aspect to at the intersection of creative business and revenue growth that you feel doesn't
Mm-hmm.
get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I think that like what kills our business is when things we don't have material or we don't have the team members or there's something really nuanced about a project that just slows it down so much that like you just can't bring money in the door. It's just brutal. Like we've had projects where like the details a project that should take from a size perspective a day and a half or 2 days takes a week, and then that kills the profitability because we just estimated it incorrectly or we
Mhm.
thought it was going to be something that it wasn't, right? And so that's been like probably the biggest like learning curve is like how do we get Moss on boards faster with it still looking as good as it was before, because the material costs are fixed. The way we do and organize our materials is fixed. The way we cut our materials, that's all fixed. That's
Mm.
basically, it is what it is, right? And we can use a little bit more of one material, a little bit less of another material, but the pricing is pretty much the same. But how you apply the moss to the boards, we had some gluing innovations that really sped things up a lot, which I don't talk about because that's one of the things that we really has helped with our
Mhm.
speed a lot. But it's also like, how good are your people? So some people, and this has been a very interesting learning experience, some people are amazing at details. Like I've had people on my team, they were so slow, but my God, the work was just ridiculous. And for tiny projects that are detail oriented, they were the best. But if you said, can you get as much material on as much board as fast as possible? They were drowning. They couldn't keep up with. And there's other people who are like speed, like their work is beautiful, but it's not the
Mm.
same because they're really good at getting a lot of board. So you have to understand like who's good at what. And then you also have to, when you're pricing, you have to know, okay, this project is going to take 1,000,000 hours. We did a project recently that just had so much detail work and it was gorgeous when it was done, but it took like forever.
Mm.
Like I said, it was supposed to take 2 days. It took a week. And but we knew that this was going to take a little bit longer. So we tried to price accordingly. Didn't quite make it, but at least we like got a little bit closer. So after a certain period of time, you also start to understand, okay, these projects are wildly slow, but we're going to have to upcharge because they're small and they're detail oriented and they take 1,000,000 hours. And then these huge ones, we just know that we need to put certain team members on this to like help with that. The other thing that we do is we do material worksheets that have all the materials that we put into every project, and we track hours. We do that for two reasons. We track hours because first of all, we want to know like how long these things should take, but also if an employee is consistently going over hours, then we know, oh, we got to do a little bit more training. And if we've continuously done training and they're not getting it, then it's time for them to go.
Mm.
And it's always this kind of fine line because we've had definitely employees who have overthought it a little bit and they will just dive into details that really aren't necessary. And then it just takes way too long and it just makes the
Right.
projects unprofitable. Because we try to keep all the projects about 50% profitable just so that we know we can cover our costs and then we know we can cover our costs for the additional for
Mm.
insurance and taxes and my assistant and me and everybody else who's got to work on the business. And then hopefully there's money left over. That's the goal, right? I've also made decisions, and this is something that, after you get out of like kind of survival, insane startup mode and you have systems in place, there's other things that you can do. Like you can buy back your time. Maybe you're less profitable, but you have other people on your team that are more expensive, but they're like giving you a much better quality of life.
Mm.
And that's the other thing. That's the other side of it that I always am talking about with people is it's not one or the other. It's really, you got to just make sure that the people are team players and that they're making your life better.
Mhm.
Because if people are making your life worse on a regular basis, when you're working with them, especially as an entrepreneur, you have to make hard decisions because frankly, it's your company.
Mm.
And I have spent a long time as a people pleaser and as someone who is just like really good at making people like me, but it has hurt me and hurt my business because I put up with all sorts of BS from people where I shouldn't have done that, because it's hurt the company and it's hurt the culture and it's hurt my experience of working. And I probably shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should listen to my own advice a little bit more. But it's hard. It's easier to talk about it, but to do it in practice and to let people go. And I'm sure you've heard this adage before. Who's going to get you from here to here is not who's going to get you from here to here.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's always, there's just different people for different stages. And there's times where I'm like, I need to fire myself. I needed to fire myself as a manager because I'm not a good manager. I'm a salesperson. That's what I like doing.
Mm.
So I like business development. I like marketing. I like all that stuff. It's like the fun, sexy front end stuff. I don't like operations. I don't like people management. But it's, as an entrepreneur, you have to know at least something about all of these things. And that's been the biggest lesson that I've learned from running this business, is like the whole gambit. You have all these levers: the operations lever, the finance lever, the marketing level, the sales lever, and they're going up and down all the time. Sometimes you got to really turn up the sales, and then you turn them up too much, and then the operations has got to come in, and then finance has got to finance, and then it's all these levers up and down trying to figure it all out. So it's been like, this has been my MBA. Some people go and get MBAs. I got a business, and I have some gray hairs that are covered by dye from it, but that's okay.
This is terrific. To wrap things up, Lindsay, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
My top takeaway from this episode, I would say that for people who are looking at my business from the outside in, it looks more glamorous than it is. And the basic underlying structure of all businesses is the same. Like I was saying, those 4 levers. And so I can say that whether you have a muscle business, you have a contracting company, you stripe parking lots for a living, all of the same fundamentals. It's the same body. It's just, I look this way and you look that way. It's the same thing. It's like the same systems that have to all work together. So whether you're building a company that does ATMs or real estate or design or anything, it's all the same fundamentals. And so learning these fundamentals has been one of the most interesting things I've ever done in my life, because I was so confused about how business worked before I got this business and before I launched this. And I would say that you have to be able to continuously push past your own comfort level and your own limitations in terms of what you think things could be, and say yes to stuff that you wouldn't say yes to, because you have to continuously make progress and be afraid and all those kinds of things. And if you learn all of this stuff, which takes a lot of time, and it's something that you have to learn by doing, in my opinion. Yes, of course you can go to school for it, but the actual application of it is one of the most gratifying experiences of my life, having done it. On the flip side, I think it's important to buy back your time, depending on the phase of your life. So if you can, and this is probably the biggest takeaway, is even if you're making a little bit less money, but you are happier, or you have a better team because you pay a little bit more and you're uplifted and they're on your team and they want you to succeed, that is the game. That's the game, 100%. People who are really cheap about that stuff, like, it just bites you over and over again. And I haven't perfected it. I'm not saying that I've perfected it, but I have noticed that for me, it's like being able to know that I have certain reliable people. They're going to show up. They're going to do a great job, all that kind of stuff. That is a game changer long-term for your success and well-being.
Mm-hmm. And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
So you can go to our website, greenwallscapes.com. We are also on literally every platform that you can think of. So at Green Wallscapes.
Okay. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Lindsay, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a blast.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.